welcome to today's virtual panel. I'm Katie Capuzzo, Director of Community at Wise, and together we're a global community dedicated to empowering the next generation of women in sales. Huge thanks to our partners for making events like this possible, and special thanks to Donaldson for sponsoring today's event. Some of you may be feeling really encouraged by your sales process at this point in the year, but others may be feeling like it's stale. You may be questioning if what you're doing is actually working. So we're going to dive into some strategies that can be really helpful in adding value to that sales process today. And joining me in that conversation is Aislinn Namanga, Director or Territory Manager rather at Donaldson, and Amy Sutton, Global Strategic Partnerships at Comply Advantage. So Aislinn, I'm going to hand it over to you first to just tell us a bit more about yourself.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Katie. Hello, everyone. My name is Aislinn Namanga. I am a territory manager at Donaldson. I've been with Donaldson for about 2 years or so. I am also a college professor. So I am teaching at the community college level within the business education department. When I'm not doing those things, I'm looking to engage my community, volunteer, or honestly just play softball. So thanks for having me today on this panel.
Amazing. A lot of things going on, and we're going to dive into how you balance all that later. Amy, I'll hand it over to you.
Thanks, Katie. Hi, everyone. My name is Amy Sutton. As Katie said, I'm the Global Strategic Partnerships Lead at Comply Advantage. I've been at Comply Advantage for the last year and a half, but prior to that, I spent 5 years at Salesforce between business development and sales. I started my career in Dublin, Ireland, which is where I call home. But I've recently, over the last 3 years, transitioned into a role in London, and I'm absolutely loving it. I suppose maybe in my spare time as well, I love exercise, so running and more recently cycling is top of mind for me.
Amazing. Well, it looks like the chat is working today. So please drop in where you're tuning from. And if you have thoughts throughout the conversation, post them in there. If you do have specific questions, while you can use the chat feature, you can also use the little Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We'll have about 10 or so minutes at the end that we are able to answer those questions. So without further ado, let's jump in. This first question is for both of you, and Aislinn, we'll start with you. Given our topic, it would be helpful to get a basic understanding of your product offerings and sales motions at both Donaldson and Comply Advantage. So what does that look like in terms of sales cycle, stakeholders, all the good things?
Yes, absolutely. Thanks, Katie. So in terms of Donaldson's product offerings, we are a filtration services provider. So applications for product include on-road and off-road vehicles, as well as industries such as agriculture, construction, and trucking. A lot of our products are lube, fuel, hydraulic filters, as well as coolant filtration. In terms of the sales motion, the sales cycle, um, in my field, I think it's a little bit shorter in terms of the aftermarket. So a few weeks, right? I know with other types of sales, you could have a sales cycle that is a full year or two. Not the case in the aftermarket sales. And then in terms of stakeholders, so there are two main stakeholders. The first being distributors, right? Those are the partners that we work with who sell our Donaldson products. And then our second group of stakeholders would be end users. So those are the customers who buy Donaldson through distribution. And so if I had to kind of just think about my job on a day to day, I think it's a mix of going after new business as well as maintaining existing business. And a lot of the business is driven through the distribution channel. Yeah, that's a lot of businesses repeat orders year over year too as well.
Okay, that's great to hear and just kind of get that understanding. Amy, what about yours?
Yeah, thank you. So Comply Advantage, essentially keeping it super high level, we help businesses fight financial crime. So we're mainly working with financial institutions to help them try find bad actors. So we might try and find these bad actors at point of onboarding. As an example, if you sign up for a bank account and you have to answer all of those horrible questions, a lot of that is us in the background trying to figure out, are you who you say you are, and are you going to do the right things with your money when you sign up for that account? We also try and find them in life. If there's any changes that happen to your profile, you might change your job on your bank account, that might change your risk profile. We also monitor transactions and different behaviors. So that's typically what we do in a nutshell. In terms of who we sell to, we're predominantly in the compliance department at the moment, which is completely new for me, having come from Salesforce. Now, that being said, that has been a blessing and a curse, because there's been a lot of value selling that has to happen, because really you're dealing with people who are quite like risk adverse. So you really need to show the value of moving to a new solution. We have a really, really strong pipeline generation culture at Comply Advantage. So that is like a very top priority for all of our sellers. And that being said, we have an absolutely exceptional marketing and demand gen team who work tirelessly, and we have some really, really good inbound leads as well. HQ in London, but we have presence across the globe.
That's really helpful. And your role has shifted from kind of more of the account executive function to partnerships. And so we'll dive into that a bit as we go to of how it differs, ways that it's still the same. Before we do that though, Aislinn, let's kick us off with more about your experience. So you've spent most of your career in sales. And as you mentioned, you spend what spare time you have helping shape future business professionals as a professor at a local college. From your perspective, what is most overlooked with value-based selling by both new and experienced sellers?
Yeah, so what I would say is most overlooked, just in terms of the years of sales experience that I have, especially with value-based selling, is that people overlook being a trusted partner for your business or for your customers. So for me, when I walk into a customer, I don't want to be seen as another vendor or another supplier, but as a partner in my customer's business. And in order to become a partner in my customer's business, I have to understand the customer's needs, their objectives, their goals, right? And then I have to frame my solution to match those needs and goals. Um, I see a lot of sales reps who are new and experienced who sometimes only focus on kind of the beginner level of sales, product features and benefits, right? And they're just maybe looking to collect orders. But I think you just need to understand your customer and you need to be of value. And so when I am entering a room with a customer, my goal is to focus on impact and their objectives.
Mm-hmm. And how do you, I guess, with your students even, relay the importance of that and like the actual tactical ways they can do that and build those strong relationships early, especially if they're getting reached out to maybe by a lot of sellers? How do
Mhm.
you stand out?
Yes, so in terms of like working with like my students or even, teaching them about sales. So believe it or not, I think it was week 11 or week 12, I covered marketing pretty in depth. And so I walked them through the sales cycle. I taught them how to anticipate objections. I taught them how to close sales. A few of my students in class, they want to be real estate agents and so
Okay.
and or they want to be real estate investors, and so I'm always teaching them how to close, like, hey, is it a 6 month lease or a 12-month lease, right? Like this, the skills are very transferable, regardless of industry.
Mm-hmm. I think that's important too, that the CTA piece, at least when I think about me being a student in business classes way back in the day, me not realizing that you've got to push that momentum forward a lot of the time, and it is up to you to do that versus kind of sitting back and just seeing what happens. So taking an active approach there, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that looks like. But thank you for sharing. Amy, like we said before, you've been on the enterprise sales side for several years and pivoted to partnerships within the last year at Comply Advantage. What are some of the similarities and differences between the two that you've seen, and how are you adding value, since that's the topic, in this new role?
Yeah, absolutely. Starting off by saying I absolutely love my new role. I have such an amazing team and I have exceptional leadership, which always makes such a big difference, especially when you're doing a bit of a career transition that can seem a bit scary to start off with. But really, like to your point, it is so similar in so many ways to being a direct sales or seller. Um, like ultimately you have to build your own pipeline, you still have to pipe generate, you still have to progress pipeline, you still have to build trust and champions throughout the sales motion. And ultimately, I still have a revenue target on my head. So all of that makes it super, super similar. That being said, what I love about partnerships is, for me anyway, at Comply Advantage, there's more than one way to find revenue. So naturally, in a direct sales role, it is finding new business within white space or finding new business within your current book of accounts. Whereas at Comply Advantage, we kind of split it into three key areas. So one being wholesale selling. So I go out and try and find people who, or companies who might want to resell our product or embed our product into their product. Which is really cool. So it means like they can scale quite quickly. The deals tend to be quite big. So that's super exciting. Then the second one is through referrals. So any adjacent or complementary industry verticals might think, we interact with a lot of these people, but we don't sell this solution. We might set up an agreement with someone like Comply Advantage. If we send them a lead and it closes, we'll take a small cut. And then finally, my favorite, which is joint go to market. So I spend a lot of time looking at the market and seeing, okay, what is not being served? Where are the gaps? And then I proactively go out and find businesses that we can collaborate with to either build or launch a new offering that fits that target audience. So not every day is the same, which I love. And it allows me to be a lot more creative. But that being said, it's just building on the skill set I had built over the last number of years.
When you think about cold outreach, is it handled the same in this partnerships role as you would handle it when you were on the sales side fully?
Yeah, I think there definitely is benefits to a partnerships role in that you're more going towards someone asking to collaborate. So I think people are more open, and often if you're reaching out to partnerships people in other companies, they're targeted similarly to you. So I think it definitely, from a pipe generation perspective, can be a lot easier than in a direct sales role, but you still need to really like have done your research and really understand what you want to be talking about, because as we all know, the market's really saturated.
Yeah. So it sounds like the value that you're driving in those initial outreaches, if you were to go back to, let's say, being account executive tomorrow, is there anything you've learned from this partnerships role that you would take with you with how you're nurturing relationships in the process?
Yeah, I think I'm taking a lot more of a casual approach, which actually seems to be resonating quite well. I think especially in the era of all of these brilliant AI tools helping us pump out more and more content and like really well polished emails. I think these people are just being flooded with them. Whereas I find one of my most successful channels is actually through LinkedIn, dropping them a message about something they maybe have on their LinkedIn profile, and asking, do you think there's something that we can collaborate on? This is why I think we should. Whereas before I probably was a little bit more formal, and that's been super successful. So I'm going to continue to do that.
Okay, that's great to know. This next question is for both of you, and we'll stick with you, Amy, first. It's been tough to navigate the market the past few years, and how does your strategy change in both strong and weak selling cycles, if at all? And this may be thinking for you, Amy, back to when you were more on the enterprise sales side.
Yeah, absolutely. I think really like kind of building on some of the points that we've just covered, like the market is super saturated, and it's kind of like how can you stand out versus the people that are also going to be reaching out to the stakeholders you're trying to get involved with. Like I think building on some of the points that have been said already, like for me, the North Star is always building trust. At the end of the day, we're all human. So really it's like at the start of those sales cycles, how can you put a huge amount of preparation into your calls and ensure that you're standing out by not only knowing the company and its challenges and what is going on in the news at the moment, but also the persona of the person you're reaching out to. So if you were used to working in a marketing tech company and you've moved to a service tech company, obviously your personas are going to care about loads of different things. And then finally, like the most personal part is like, how can you find something about them on the internet? Maybe they went to the same university as you, maybe they're from the same place, that you can make that personal connection as well. I think really sets you up for a super strong foundation at the start.
Mm-hmm. Aislinn, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, honestly, I think a lot has changed, since the pandemic. I mean, during the pandemic, whoever had inventory, regardless of price, was able to sell large quantities of items, and that was across all industries. However, once we shifted to a post-pandemic world, where we didn't necessarily return to normal, there was this need ever more to be more adaptable in both strong and weak selling markets. Right now, if I had to categorize the market, I would say that we are in a weak market. So my focus is on growing market share and then making sure that I'm looking at new markets and new opportunities. Yes, it's important to focus on your existing base of customers, right? Through service and support and doubling down even on the core customers that you have so that you're not losing them to competition. However, if you're going to make it through the next 2 or 3 years, you have to have new projects in the pipeline to meet your goals.
So, how do you prioritize if you were to think your workload in a week or even in a day, nurturing the existing customers versus getting new leads and doing the business development side? What's that split for you?
Yes, so overall, I would say the split is like 60/40.
Okay.
60% being a focus on new customers, new distribution, and then about 40% on existing customers.
Mm-hmm. Okay. That's good to know.
Yes, the day-to-day organizing, just making sure that my week reflects that split and engaging with my customers using a variety of tools, whether that's using my cell phone, using Zoom, visiting the customer on site, visiting distribution and customer in the same call, just finding out ways to engage the customer.
Mm-hmm. That brings me to kind of a follow up thought around the organization piece. I think, especially in the summer, for some roles, things slow down a little bit, but people are wanting to still stay organized and motivated to get things done before things get super busy again. How are y'all staying both motivated but also organized at a weekly basis? Are there tools in addition to what you just named, Aislinn, that you're using to do that? Or are there best practices that you've even found for yourself? It's kind of a two-part question: organization, but then also the motivation piece.
Yes, sure. So, I organize everything through what I call, what is it, OneNote. So I'll use OneNote and, of course, our CRM tools, right? Our customer relationship management tools to stay organized in terms of the activities that I do with customers, as well as some of the action items that I need to follow up with certain customers on. And I use a lot of my calendar as well to plan events, and I sometimes set notifications when to visit certain core customers again. So that way I'm not losing touch points with them. There's certain customers I know that I need to visit them, every 2 months or every month even, right? It really depends on their business needs and their relationship with my company.
Mm-hmm. That's helpful. Amy, anything else there?
I have the world's worst answer that no one's going to want to hear, but I don't have a massive structure. I'm very reliant on calendar to be able to do all my follow-ups. I have a standing follow-up at the end of every day, and I put in the names of the people that I need to follow up with on those days. And then yeah, if there's someone I need to follow up with, come back in 3 months, let's say, again, very calendar reliant. So definitely open for anyone's tips if there's productivity tools or organizational tools out there.
Yeah, I use my calendar a lot as well for reminders and follow ups and check ins and that kind of thing. So it has been interesting to see some of the differences in best practices. And I also have a notebook that I write everything down on that is a disaster zone that only I can decipher. So everyone
Yeah.
has their preferences. Um, Aislinn, we discussed the importance of having a personal brand when we spoke and then leveraging that to drive trust with your customers. How do you think about that?
Yeah, so I'm a big believer in having a personal brand. A lot of people say that, hey, Aislinn, you're really thorough. So I'm like, oh, does that mean I'm too serious? But no, it's actually a good thing. It means that I'm very accountable as well. Customers know when they work with me that I'm going to follow up on action items, that I'm going to address those specific needs, right? And so I think that that helps them see me as a partner in their business. Externally, some customers also know that I teach as well. And so being able to connect with them in that way with the teaching aspect. Sometimes I'll get questions such as, what is your take on the economy? Do you have an outlook on, economic conditions? Sometimes they share their new ideas with me. So I think that that's been an interesting way to connect with them. And then in terms of outside of me and just outside of my sales career, I've noticed something among the top performing sales reps at various organizations, and it's that they have their own personal brand. And so they have this brand internal with their company as well as externally within a larger community. So, for example, a top performing sales rep, um, usually you'll see them a part of organizations or associations, or you'll see them play a larger role within the community. So, for instance, if you have a sales rep that is in the oil fields, you'll usually see them as well be a part of a petroleum association if they're a top performing rep. And so, you don't necessarily have to join an association or do that, but maybe there's other ways you can engage with your customers outside of just the sales call. I think that shouldn't be the only engagement with your customers. So you can look at conferences, trade shows, just connecting with them in a different space in a more meaningful way.
Mm-hmm. Along those lines, in building your personal brand, it's obviously a lot of it's internal and then how you're displaying that externally. You
Mhm.
mentioned at the start several things you're a part of your full time role, obviously at Donaldson, obviously a professor, and then you've done several other things that you mentioned too that you're part of. How do you decide where you're going to spend your time and what aligns? Like, are you doing a checks and balances? Does this align with my brand and my goals to determine that?
Mhm. Yes, so I think that's an area where I could actually use some improvement. I think for the most part, I'm subscribed to a lot of like organizations. So if there's an event that's in town, I'll usually try to attend it, right? But that's not me necessarily being strategic and planning, right? It's more me being reactive. So based on the event that's available at the time by the organization. So that's one area that I could definitely improve in for sure.
I think we probably all could. So it's comforting to know that you're in the same boat and you're managing it all. Amy, it's critical to connect the dots for your customers. How do you position your product as a worthwhile investment when budgets are constricting in the short term and ROI may be an actualization in the long term?
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think there's necessarily a one size fits all. I kind of look at it as there's kind of two elements to it. I think there's a proactive approach that you can do to try and put yourself in the best position to build that ROI and to be able to then like share that business case and really drive the value. But then B, there are going to be things that come out of the woodworks and how you can react to those as well. So kind of on the proactive side, I think there's three key areas. Super, super boring, but super important is just great discovery. So, how can you learn as much as you can about the person that you're working with, about their problem, about the business as you can? I think what is also super important is trying to quantify those metrics in the qualification. So, understanding, okay, this is your problem, but how is it impacting the business? How many people does this impact? How many leads are you not getting? How many service cases can you no longer close? That is super important. And then building on top of that is taking all of that great discovery and great metrics that you've found and really building out a really robust business case. When we were at Salesforce, that we had so many different products we could sell, but there was one called Pardot, which was our B2B marketing automation tool that we all loved to sell. Now, I won't say that it was an easy sell by any means, shape, or form, but it was a really easy product to be able to build the return on investment on. So quite simply, all we needed to know was how many leads someone got a month, how big their average deal size was, and what their conversion rate was. And we could map that to our solution, give them a really, really strong ROI. So building out a business case is super important. At Comply Advantage, how we typically build out business cases, which I had never done before and has worked quite well, is putting it into a why change, why now, why us? Obviously not calling it that, but kind of framing it in that way. At the end of the day, when you get in front of an exec, they don't want to see pages and pages and slides and slides. They want to see a really, really quick snapshot of what's the impact of the business and of not doing anything, and what's the impact of potentially doing something. And then finally, in the final part of the proactive part is stakeholder management. So trying not to get yourself siloed. I think I've made so many mistakes in the past of finding a champion and working really closely with them, but not looking across the business. And those are always the deals that fail. So looking to see who else you can get to know in the business, how you can align different stakeholders for different needs. Our CRO is obsessed with what he calls exec interlock. So as early on in the sales process, trying to align execs on our side with the execs of the customer, so that everyone is aware that this project is happening. It's kind of almost like getting a pre-sign off that, okay, we're happy to hear you're doing this. Let's see what maybe the results of the business case turn out to be. So that's the proactive side from that perspective. And then I think the reactive side is like there's going to be so many things that come that are out of your control. Businesses can change direction, projects can be abandoned, and often, while this is a horrible part of any deal, it can also be like quite a time to get creative. So often your champion won't know about this before anyway. So it's kind of you working with them to see, okay, how can we get around this? Okay, budgets have been cut, or we're no longer doing this, but we had planned to do a region-wide rollout. Maybe we could go into a small part and prove some value in there, maybe with like a few licenses or a few team members, and then be able to take that and execute on that really well and kind of do a land and expand. And then people are actually almost willing to invest more later on if they've had that kind of crawl, walk, run approach.
Mm-hmm. When you talk about getting execs involved, exec interlock, is that what you called it?
Well, that's what my CRO calls it. It's
Okay.
it's definitely not my word.
Yeah. How early is that happening? Because I think it's also, I've heard it phrased as, getting internal sponsors or like leadership sponsors to basically say, I am saying that this project is happening or this deal is happening on both sides, internal and external, from a leadership point of view.
Absolutely. Yeah, and it can vary, but where we tend to see it in the sales cycle, or where we try to have it, is once you have mutually agreed that there is a potential project. So before you do a proof of concept, before you do a big technical deep dive, because it's almost, and how we sell it to our champions is saying, this is going to take a lot of resource for us to go through a proof of concept or through a trial phase or through anything like that. We just need to make sure that we're all aligned, that if we're able to satisfy criteria A, B, C, D, that you're willing to explore investing in this. It's not always as easy as that. And I think it's very naive to think that a sales motion can be out of a book, because there's going to be so many different like nuances to it. What we often try and do as well, which is super helpful, is we try and do exec dinners in some cities. So our key hubs are London and New York. So as and where possible, if our team hosts an event or something like that, we try and set up a dinner that has maybe some execs from our side, and that gives all of our sales reps and myself in partnerships an opportunity to informally get these execs in front of our execs to start having that conversation.
makes sense. Aislinn, are you finding that you are ever working internally with other stakeholders within Donaldson to help get a deal over the line?
Yes, absolutely. We have different departments that we work with and different teams, right? So I'm always reaching out to them, whether it's for reporting or just, questions about insights from our customer relationship management tools. I'm reaching out to them to help prepare for some of those calls, right? Where I'm looking to close the customer. So yes, I am working with internal stakeholders as well.
Great. And along those lines, this question kind of ties into that. We'll start with you, Aislinn. It's clear that making an impact with your customer is key early on. What are those key touch points following a discovery call into closing and implementation that support the relationship from your perspective?
Yes, absolutely. So, when I think about key touch points, I think about the sales cycle as a whole, right? And the sales cycle usually has or comprises of several steps. So, the first step being you prospecting for business leads. And then, of course, once you're identifying an opportunity, you want to qualify the opportunity and make sure that you're also qualifying the decision maker. Then once you have the decision maker, you need to understand their needs, their objectives, and then you can present your product, present your solutions from there, and then also be ready for objections. I think a lot of us sales reps, we don't like objections, and I'm like, what? It's one of the best parts of the process, because at least with an objection, you have something that you can work through, right? An objection tells me that you're interested enough to tell me no and why you're telling me no. Is my pricing too expensive? Okay, well, let's work on pricing, right? Like there's an additional task that I can work on to close the business. I prefer objections to indifference, where someone says, okay, I'll think about it. That's not an objection, that's them not being interested enough. And so I'll pry a little bit more until I can get an objection. And then lastly, you want to focus on following up and closing the sale with the customer and just making sure that things go smoothly.
I love that mindset shift, objection versus indifference, and then also seeing objection as a good thing, ultimately, something that you can combat, and a good seller can do that. Before I get your take on this, Amy, if anyone does have any questions, we're nearing the end of our panel, so just drop them in that Q&A box at the bottom of the screen, and we'll get to them in just a few minutes. Amy, what is your take on this question?
I also would love to reiterate that objection piece is brilliant. I absolutely love that. You're completely right. I think if I look at it, let's say I take the question in a slightly different way, maybe because Aislinn has answered it very eloquently, maybe what areas I try and engage with my stakeholders in tends to be something that I find really interesting. So I often think what's most important and can be often really overlooked is personal connection. So be it at the start of the sales cycle or at the end of the sales cycle, we're all human, and trying to find similar interests or just trying to really understand that person. And because you're going to be spending a huge amount of time with them, I've seen so much benefit in building that trust with the people on a human level. Something that I find really interesting through the sales cycle, and I've learned a lot about at Comply Advantage, is the coaching side. So how can, at every stage of the sales cycle, how can we help the people who are buying? How can we be the easiest people to buy from? And how can I make their life as easy as possible? Answering those two questions, I think you're going to be on to a really productive conversation, really productive sales cycle. So have the people that you're speaking to, have they ever bought tech before? Have they ever had to go through loads of different requirements for that tech? And what I found has been super helpful in my role has been sellers that have never, or buyers who have never bought before, sitting down with them and agreeing, what is it that you're looking for? Do they actually know all of the requirements they need? And in most cases, they don't. So we've often had an exercise where we go through each of the different functionalities. There's a lot of past RFPs that had been sent into Comply Advantage that I was able to leverage as a template as part of that. It meant I get extra face time with the potential buyer, but it also meant I was able to bake in a lot of the kind of unique differentiators that my product had that some of the competitors didn't. So I knew when they were going and looking at my tool, but also my competitor's tool, that I knew what they were ticking, whether it was right or wrong. So I found that the coaching side is super impactful. And then kind of like building on the kind of how can we get as many people involved. I feel leveraging technical colleagues of mine is also super impactful. I'm not very technical myself, but there tends to be technical stakeholders across the board. How can we engage the right people across the organization? I find to be like really impactful. Because as we've talked about, those objections, the person that you're engaged with might not know the objections of everyone in their organization. So the further you can spread it, the better.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great point, that customers don't always want to buy just the cheapest option. If they've worked with someone who made it easy for them, that was available, that kind of got ahead of their objections and questions, that can cement the relationship early. We did have a question come in around that idea of following up early on and throughout the sales process. Really, when you're trying to cement things, how do you consistently follow up or kind of keep that FaceTime going without being annoying? Whoever has thoughts first can jump in.
Sure. So, in terms of following up, I always like to follow up in person, right? And it's a casual approach, right? Because if it's formal, it's annoying. Especially if you have to follow up, more than once. It's a casual approach. Or I'm calling or texting, just, letting them know that, hey, you're still top of mind. Because believe it or not, in sales, you could follow up with someone 6 months later and they could say yes. And so you always want to have those touch points. I knew a guy who he said, Aislinn, I've been following up with this guy for 5 years and he finally signed the contract. I was like, all right, that's
Wow.
amazing. He's also one of the most top performing sales reps I've ever met in my life. So President's Club almost every year.
Wow.
He's that good. And so yes, it's never too late to follow up, and it's always good to have touch points with customers.
That's great. Amy, any thoughts there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think diversifying what you're following up with, and like not making it about yourself. So it's not like, hi, do you now want to buy my product? It's, hi, is this still a problem? Hi, have you found a solution to that? Hi, I found this article that I thought was actually really relevant to you. I thought you'd like it. Hi, there's a webinar going on. Thought you'd like this as well. I think if you can diversify what you're following up with and actually like to this webinar adding value, it doesn't seem as annoying as if you're just making it about yourself.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. Another question coming in kind of along these lines is, when you're working with a customer and you get to almost the end of the process and they decide, I can't buy right now, whether it's due to budget or whatever the case may be, how are you keeping that lead warm? And what does that follow up or relationship, maintaining that relationship, look like when they aren't able to buy right now?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on this one. I think the why is going to be important. So if the why is we don't have budget, okay, like were you speaking, like the questions you ask yourself, like were you speaking with the right people? Has there been a change in the business? Understanding those questions help. So I have a deal that I'm working on at the moment. Their end of financial year was in the end of May. We had the deal didn't end up transpiring. There was a number of issues, but because I knew why it wouldn't happen, I now can put the steps in place to make sure that we can have it happen. But I do think like trying to get FaceTime with people, especially if you're late in the sales cycle, is really, really important. So any interactions you can do face to face help you uncover some of the nuances that you can't get over the phone. Like anytime I'm in a lift with someone, I end up finding a lot more out than I would do if I just hopped on a Zoom.
Mm-hmm. That's a great point. Aislinn, anything else that you'd add there?
Yeah, in sales, I love the why, right? Like always continue to ask why until you can get, a solution or your answer. So why is there a budget constraint? Well, the manager said this, or Scott said that. And then it's like, okay, well, maybe in the sales process, I missed someone, an additional stakeholder who has a say so, right? Sometimes that can happen. And then we just go back a step or two in the sales process and then we re-engage and kind of just go from there. So I love asking why.
Yeah. It's a good reminder too that it's not lost, at the end, even if it doesn't work out right now, there's always steps that you can go back to hopefully re-engage. Good reminder for everyone going into the summer. Well, thank y'all so much. This was incredible. I learned a lot from you, and I know our audience did as well.